Hey guys! Today we're diving into another truly horrifying case. If you want to support my channel, make sure to subscribe and stay active. It really helps me out. I'd be super grateful for that. Let's get started. Summer 2024. A quiet suburban neighborhood in southeast England. The kind of place where life unfolds at a calm, predictable pace, until one July evening when everything changed in minutes. An emergency call. A panicked woman. Her words rushed, saying she's running out of time. First responders rush over, unaware that in a few short moments, they will witness what would later be called one of the most horrifying cases in recent memory. What happened behind the closed door of an otherwise ordinary house? Why did this case shock the nation and become a symbol of cruelty and obsession? The answers lie in a story where personal relationships turned catastrophic and trust became a deadly trap. The Hunt family lived in a small town where neighbors knew each other by name and life felt steady. John Hunt led the household, an established voice in the sports world. His commentary on the races aired on the BBC and became a fixture for thousands. John was valued in his profession for his dynamic delivery, ability to pull in an audience, and instant reactions to unfolding events. His wife, Carol Hunt, was the opposite of his public persona. She stayed in the background, yet it was her efforts that kept warmth and harmony in the home. Carol tended to the small things, preparing dinner, supporting their daughter's pursuits. Her blend of gentleness and strength made her a pillar for her loved ones. John and Carol had 3 daughters. The eldest, Hannah, found her calling in the beauty and self-care world, using the wellness industry as a path to fulfillment. The middle daughter, Louise, took a different road. After working in salons, in 2022, she decided to follow her passion: animals. She launched Groom and Glow, a small dog grooming salon. Louise didn't stop at grooming. She trained in pet first aid, earning respect from her clients. The youngest, Amy, didn't live at home full-time. She'd started building a life of her own. That distance ultimately shielded her from the events to come. Though all 3 sisters were different in interests and temperament, they shared love for their parents and kept the family bond intact. To many, the Hunts seemed like the picture of a thriving English family. Nothing hinted their lives could be torn apart so abruptly. Meanwhile, across London, a very different story was unfolding. Kyle Clifford, born in 1998, grew up in instability. His family moved frequently, so he never put down roots or formed lasting friends, and learned to expect uncertainty. School years were marked by aggression and discipline issues. As a teenager, he became someone people steered clear of, due to his tendency toward conflict and difficulty managing emotions. Looking for a way out, he enlisted in the British Army, but the strict discipline didn't ground him. It only intensified the turmoil inside. Fellow soldiers noticed his obsession with violent and aggressive content, his open disrespect toward women, and a rough, often confrontational attitude. Even in the rigid structure of military life, he stood out for the wrong reasons, refusing orders, lashing out at others, and disregarding basic conduct. His time in service was short-lived, and by 2022, he returned to civilian life without a clear path forward. What followed was a string of chaotic attempts to find stability. A security job didn't last. Conflicts with co-workers and unstable behavior made him hard to work with. Gradually, he started withdrawing from people, sinking deeper into his own inner world. 2 lives, one of a stable, loving family, and the other of a young man growing up in the shadows of anger and emotional instability, were on a collision course. That intersection would mark the beginning of a tragedy. Louise met Kyle Clifford in 2022, around the time she was fully focused on launching her dog grooming salon. He was trying to reorient himself after leaving the military. Their connection began through messaging and occasional meetups. Louise was drawn to Kyle's apparent interest in her work. He asked questions, praised her drive, and came across as a thoughtful listener. The early weeks were calm. Kyle was punctual, quick to reply, and engaged warmly with Louise's family. She saw these behaviors as signs of emotional maturity, hoping that her support might help him find the balance he lacked. But others saw things differently. Her family was wary of Kyle's temper and warned Louise not to rush into anything. Her mother, Carol, urged her to focus on his actions, not just his words. Her father, John, kept his distance, but showed clear caution. Friends voiced their concern too, sensing there was something troubling beneath Kyle's polite exterior. Over time, Kyle's behavior began to shift. His critiques started small, comments about Louise's looks, but soon expanded to complaints about her work attire and colleagues. Framed as concern, these remarks slowly turned into control. Then came the demands. He wanted her to share her location, respond to texts and calls immediately, and explain every outing or delay. Even short visits to her parents triggered suspicion. If Louise didn't reply fast enough, the messages quickly turned into a barrage of questions. What disturbed her most was his online behavior. She noticed him spending hours watching videos from influencers who justified aggressive male behavior and held toxic views about women. Afterward, he'd become irritable, insisting that a partner's role was to obey. By the end of their first year together, the restrictions were constant. They didn't live together, but the rules Kyle enforced gave the feeling of being under watch 24/7. Her loved ones began to notice changes. Louise was seeing her friends less, often looked tense, and excused his behavior by saying, "It just helps him stay calm." Her family tried to support her and encouraged her to maintain her boundaries. But Kyle saw Louise's independence as a threat. What had once felt like a supportive relationship slowly morphed into a system of constant control, where trust faded, replaced by pressure and demands. Kyle Clifford became increasingly immersed in aggressive online communities. His jealousy took on many forms. He'd accuse Louise of being too friendly with clients or question every comment she got on social media. For Kyle, her connection to the outside world wasn't normal. It was a threat. And the deeper the relationship went, the less freedom Louise had. Her emotional state gradually began to shift. At first, she interpreted his strict behavior as insecurity and tried to be understanding, hoping her presence might calm him. She often excused his sharp tone, telling herself that beneath it was someone afraid of rejection. But over time, it became harder to look the other way. Her efforts to avoid conflict left her drained. She found herself choosing words more carefully, sidestepping topics just to prevent outbursts. Fatigue crept in, even though outwardly she tried to keep up her cheerful appearance. Love for Louise had become a daily battle between the urge to help and the need to protect herself. Occasional moments of tenderness from Kyle kept her hoping for change, but those moments were growing shorter, replaced by suspicion, pressure, and emotional volatility. By late June 2024, Louise made the decision to end things. It followed a period of intense stress, culminating in a car accident. She lost control and crashed into a pole. The injuries were minor, but the incident pushed her to reflect and take a step back. On June 24th, Louise sent Kyle a clear, calm message. She expressed her decision to step away for the sake of her mental well-being. She emphasized that the breakup wasn't about blame. She asked for mutual respect and urged him not to turn the ending into more hurt. She hoped he'd focus on taking care of himself. At first, Kyle responded with restraint. His message was formal. He thanked her for her honesty, said he hoped for peace between them, and told her he still loved her. It seemed he'd accepted her decision. Then came a shift. Louise's phone filled with long texts and voice notes. At first, Kyle said he understood. He asked for another chance, promised change, and talked about counseling and a fresh start. He offered plans: less talking, more action, a way to reset the relationship. Then the tone turned more intense. We're meant to be. No one understands you like I do. Don't throw away something that can be fixed. Next came apologies for past outbursts and pledges to make up for every mistake. But when he didn't get the kind of reply he wanted, the messages grew contradictory. Love declarations turned into desperate pleas, then short bursts of guilt-tripping, then flashes of frustration. He started saying things like, "You're leaving me alone. I gave you everything. Why are you doing this to me?" It was no longer a conversation. It became a flood of monologues, with Kyle asking questions and answering them himself. By the end of the week, the tone of Kyle's messages had shifted entirely. Louise was no longer the one he blamed. Instead, it was the people who came between them. His texts increasingly mentioned her mother and sister, sometimes friends, and even clients. He insisted they had turned her against him, that outside voices had destroyed their relationship. In his mind, Louise's decision was no longer her own. It became part of a larger plot, and his obsessive behavior took on the illusion of justification. Then came a new pattern. Attempts to control her surroundings remotely. He made comments like, "Your family is interfering," or "They don't belong in our private life." Any reminder about boundaries or her right to make her own choices triggered sharp, defensive replies. For Louise, this was the final confirmation that she'd made the right call. Her replies grew shorter, neutral in tone. She avoided discussing the past. It was vital for her to remain calm and not get pulled into another emotional spiral. But for Kyle, that pause only meant one thing. It was time to push harder. If his original focus had been on convincing Louise to stay, it now shifted to the people he held responsible for their breakup. In his logic, she hadn't left. She had been taken. And to get her back, he needed not just her attention, but also to remove the influence of her family. That mental shift became the turning point. By early July 2024, Kyle Clifford was no longer seeking reconciliation. His behavior became systematic, directed solely at preparing for an attack. He began with online searches, specific, chilling phrases: how to end someone's life, how to restrain a person, what types of weapons are most effective. The wording showed a cold, calculated mindset. He chose a crossbow. It was purchased online, along with a set of bolts. The total cost came to just over £350. Shortly after, he added a field dressing knife to the order, priced under £100. More purchases followed: a roll of heavy-duty silver duct tape, several bundles of rope, and canisters of gasoline. In one store, security footage captured him hesitating between a large spool and two smaller ones, trying to match the item precisely to the task he had in mind. His arsenal also included an air-powered weapon, acquired as a backup in case the crossbow failed. Every item he selected had a clear purpose. He wasn't acting impulsively. This was preparation. Surveillance became another part of the plan. Kyle monitored Carol Hunt's social media accounts, tracking her posts to learn her routine. He studied the broadcast schedule for John Hunt's sports commentary to ensure the father would be away on the chosen day. Even the weather forecast became part of the planning. He checked what conditions were expected on July 9th. Rain or heat could affect his movement, his timing, and how fast he could carry out his plan. By early July, Kyle Clifford had a plan in place. He had gathered tools, written notes expressing his intentions, and was fully convinced that the Hunt women would be home and unprotected. Most importantly, he had ensured that John Hunt would be away, allowing him to focus on those he blamed for the breakup. The morning of July 9th, 2024, began like any other for the residents of Bushey, a quiet town in Hertfordshire. It was a warm summer day. People were going to work, walking their dogs, shopping at the local supermarket. The atmosphere was calm. typical for a weekday. No one could have imagined that their town was about to become the center of one of the largest police operations in recent history. Kyle Clifford, unlike those around him, was following a completely different script. His morning appeared uneventful. He spent time with family, even accompanied them to a gardening supply store. Security cameras captured him, walking calmly with relatives, pushing a stroller, smiling, just another young man out running errands. He appeared composed, even cheerful, giving no sign of what was to come. But beneath the surface, he remained fixated on the plan. That shopping trip was the final layer in the illusion of normalcy. Around 1:30 p.m., Kyle drove toward the street where the Hunts lived. He parked a block away to avoid drawing attention. At approximately 1:40, he began watching the house. He wanted to confirm that John was indeed at work and that the women were home alone. Once he was certain, he returned to his vehicle to retrieve a bag. His approach was methodical. In plain sight, he only carried a few of Louise's old belongings and a card with neutral wording. The weaponry was left nearby, hidden, to avoid suspicion during the initial encounter. The goal was to appear calm, civil, someone who had come to make peace. He intended to use Carol's kindness to get inside. Just before 2 p.m., Kyle approached the home. His demeanor was restrained, his behavior quiet. He looked like someone ready to end things amicably, but what he had really come to do was carry out a carefully orchestrated act of violence. When Carol Hunt opened the door, she saw Kyle, but nothing about his appearance raised alarms. He spoke softly, acted composed, and gave the impression of someone there to resolve things peacefully. Trusting him, she let him in. That's when the politeness dropped. Kyle pulled out a knife and attacked. The first wounds struck her chest and abdomen, followed by slashes to her arms and back. The nature of the injuries showed she fought back, raising her arms, trying to defend herself, but he overpowered her. Within seconds, it was over. After attacking Carol, he briefly left the house to retrieve the crossbow he had stashed nearby. Then he returned, heading for Louise. She had been in the yard, working in the small space she used for her dog grooming business. When she came inside, Kyle grabbed her. He acted quickly, tying her hands behind her back with duct tape, binding her legs the same way. Her screams were muffled by a strip of tape across her mouth. Louise was now completely at his mercy. The next 2 hours were filled with cruelty. He didn't stop at restraint. He inflicted pain, driven by a desire to dominate. The injuries later documented by medical professionals made it clear these hours were the most excruciating of her life. Hannah came home later that day and walked in on Kyle holding a crossbow. She immediately understood what was happening and tried to alert someone. She managed to send a quick message to her boyfriend. "Kyle's here. He's tying us up. We need the police." It was her final attempt to save her family. Kyle didn't let her finish the call. He aimed the crossbow and fired. The bolt struck Hannah in the chest. The injury was fatal, though she didn't die immediately. She tried to move, but her strength faded quickly. While emergency services were being dispatched, Kyle was already leaving the scene. Hannah remained inside, severely wounded. Her mother and sister lay nearby, lifeless. When police entered the home, Hannah was still breathing, but passed shortly after. In just a few hours on July 9th, the lives of all 3 Hunt women were taken. Everything that followed stemmed from this day, when a meticulously planned act turned into devastating reality. Despite her injuries, Hannah managed to call emergency services. She gave her name and address, her voice weak and broken. Fragments came through the line. "He's here. Crossbow. We're tied up. Can't breathe. Not much time." The dispatcher immediately classified the call as critical, pinpointed the location, and alerted the nearest units. As they kept her on the line, they asked crucial questions. Was it safe to stay? Could she see the attacker? Were there other victims? Hannah could only manage a few words. Mom, sister. The call dropped more than once, but the dispatcher stayed with her, relaying real-time updates to the responding officers. The first to arrive were local patrol units, acting on information about a potential crossbow injury and multiple victims. One officer stayed outside to coordinate while two entered the house. Inside the doorway, they found Hannah with a bolt still in her chest. Her condition was deteriorating fast despite paramedics' efforts. As medics worked to stabilize her, another unit searched the home and discovered the bodies of two other women. One was older, showing multiple stab wounds consistent with defensive injuries. The other, a younger woman, was found bound with signs of prolonged physical trauma. Officers quickly established a double perimeter. Alerts were sent out for a male suspect, believed to be armed with a crossbow and possibly other weapons. All units were advised to avoid direct confrontation and report sightings immediately. Paramedics attempted to stabilize Hannah for emergency transport, but resuscitation efforts failed. She was pronounced dead inside the home. Forensic specialists documented the scene, body positions, signs of struggle, the location of various items. A roll of silver duct tape and other materials used for restraint were collected as evidence. A diagram was created, marking likely entry and exit points. Blood traces were found on the stairwell and near the entrance, critical for reconstructing Kyle's movements inside the house. Notably, investigators confirmed that the family's father was absent during the attack, supporting the theory that the timing was chosen specifically to isolate the women. At the same time, a coordinated door-to-door operation was launched. Residents were asked to remain indoors and provide any footage from home security systems, video doorbells, or dash cams recorded in the previous hours. Some neighbors had heard screams, but didn't grasp the severity of what was happening. Requests were also sent to nearby stores and gas stations for surveillance footage showing entrances, exits, and parking areas. A command center brought in analysts to review video material in real time, working to track the suspect's escape route. By evening, law enforcement officially declared the search had entered an active phase. The perimeter around Bushy was expanded, and armed units, K-9 teams, and aerial support were deployed. Locals were instructed to immediately report any man carrying a concealed object or acting suspiciously near wooded or park areas. Patrols began checking vehicles, garages, basements, and abandoned structures. The attacker had managed to flee the crime scene in just minutes. Preliminary findings confirmed he left the Hunt residence at 6:55 p.m. Surveillance cameras captured a man walking with something wrapped in a light-colored cloth. When zoomed in, investigators confirmed it was the crossbow, hidden from public view. He walked calmly, then got into a car and drove away. These frames became critical evidence. They confirmed the suspect was still armed and posed a serious threat not only to police, but to anyone who might cross his path. That same evening, Hertfordshire Police issued a public statement directly addressing Clifford, urging him to surrender peacefully. Residents were instructed not to open their doors to strangers. Warnings were broadcast through local radio and television stations. Social media alerts featured his photo, along with the advisory, "Do not approach." Suspect is armed and dangerous. Video collected from various sources revealed a partial route. His car was seen on traffic cameras, but the signal was lost a few miles later, making it harder to pinpoint his direction. Authorities had to consider every possible route he could have taken. Police agencies coordinated across neighboring counties, working to prevent him from fleeing the region. In the hours after his photo went public, hundreds of calls came in from concerned citizens. Some said they saw a man matching his description in a local park. Others reported a person with a large bag at a gas station. Each lead was investigated, but none were confirmed. Tension mounted. The killer was still at large, and no one knew if he might strike again. By midnight on July 9th, the entire region was on edge. This was no longer a local incident. People across the country were now watching the story unfold. Footage from bushy and nearby roads was compiled to form a single route. After leaving the Hunt residence, the suspect's vehicle was tracked heading toward North London, where his family lived. By the next morning, the search area was narrowed to the blocks surrounding the Clifford family home. Around 8 a.m., an armed unit entered the residence. Inside, investigators recovered several letters and handwritten notes, some addressed to loved ones with hints of farewell, others written more like personal reflections outlining his intentions. These findings confirmed that the attack had been premeditated and that Kyle hadn't planned to stay hidden for long. The information was immediately passed to the Central Command and investigative teams. Later that day, an anonymous tip came in. A man resembling the suspect had been seen entering a family mausoleum at a cemetery less than 100 yards from his home. The area was sealed off. Tactical units formed both outer and inner perimeters, and K-9 teams and medical support were brought in. At the mausoleum entrance, officers followed standard procedure, using a loudspeaker to announce their presence, identify themselves as armed officers, and request that he come out with his hands visible. Bodycam footage showed movement inside. After a second warning, the individual loaded the crossbow and turned it on himself. The shot rang out moments later. Paramedics standing by were cleared to enter. The man was found on the floor, a bolt lodged in his upper torso. He was alive, but barely. His pulse was faint, and his breathing shallow. As he was being transported, trauma specialists were alerted about a potential spinal cord injury and the risk of severe internal bleeding. The self-inflicted injury didn't result in immediate death, but it caused irreversible harm. The mausoleum was sealed, and all items inside were collected as evidence. Coordinates and the timeline of the operation were logged. Authorities announced that the suspect had been located and was now in custody. The threat to the public was officially over. Kyle was transferred under heavy guard to a trauma center. Doctors stabilized him, but the spinal injury caused paralysis from the waist down and severely affected his speech. The outlook for recovery was bleak. Independent mobility was ruled out, and he would require a wheelchair and full-time care for the foreseeable future. He remained under strict guard in the ICU, then in a long-term recovery unit with highly restricted access. Once his condition was stable, investigators scheduled the first official interview. Audio and video equipment were brought into his hospital room. Present were homicide detectives, a representative from the district attorney's office, and a defense attorney. The session began with confirming his identity, reading him his rights, and ensuring he understood the legal warnings. He nodded, asked for water, and then after a pause, quietly said in French, "I'm sorry, that was evil." The lead investigator moved to specific questions, but each was met with the same reply: no comment. Excerpts from the recovered writings were read aloud. Dates of purchases and payments were laid out. Still, no response. Questions about motive, blame, or the timeline led to the same answer. He gave no evaluations, no insights into his actions, no acknowledgement of the planning involved. His demeanor remained flat and emotionless. He didn't argue or agree. He asked no questions, showed no concern about how the evidence would be interpreted. The second and third sessions followed the same pattern. Efforts to prompt a narrative response went nowhere. He confirmed that he heard and understood the questions, but refused to elaborate. Medical staff monitored his endurance, and each session ended due to medical necessity. Before adjourning, detectives entered the next block of statements into the record. No comment. The only meaningful words he spoke in front of investigators came early on: a brief, "I'm sorry," and a description of his actions as evil. Everything else was silence. It was a deliberate choice, a refusal to disclose any details. The trial began after medical evaluations confirmed the defendant was mentally competent to participate in court proceedings. He was brought into the courtroom under guard in a wheelchair equipped with restraints. Throughout the hearings, his facial expression remained blank, and he showed no emotion. At the outset, he pleaded guilty to the murders of Carol, Hannah, and Louise Hunt. However, he denied guilt on the charge involving prolonged abuse and cruelty toward Louise. That decision was devastating for the family, as it forced the court to hear detailed medical testimony. Experts described the injuries in clinical terms, and the surviving relatives had to sit through it all. Another layer of trauma in an already unbearable ordeal. The trial itself was brief. The facts gathered during the investigation were comprehensive, and his admission of guilt on the main charges made acquittal impossible. The jury reached a unanimous verdict, guilty on all counts, including the charge of torture, despite his denial. The courtroom was silent as the verdict was read. 3 life sentences without the possibility of parole, plus additional years for related charges, including kidnapping, illegal possession of weapons, and physical violence. The judge noted that the defendant's actions were driven by hatred and selfishness, and that the crime displayed an extraordinary degree of brutality and coldness. For the Hunt family, the conviction confirmed that justice had been served, but it brought no relief. 3 lives had been taken, and no sentence could fill that void. The court's decision marked the end of a case that had shaken the entire nation. After the sentencing, the Hunt family was reduced to 2, John and Amy. He had lost his wife and 2 daughters. She had lost her mother and sisters. Their home in Bushy, once a place of warmth, had become a painful reminder of that horrific day. John, a respected sports broadcaster, did not return to work. Amy withdrew from public life. In announcing the verdict, the judge emphasized that the crime was a chilling expression of deep-rooted misogyny, not a moment of rage, but a premeditated attack fueled by resentment. At the end of the trial, only photographs of Carol, Louise, and Hannah remained on the bench across from the defendant. No longer just evidence, they had become symbols of a family that no longer existed. The trial ended, but for John and Amy, the emptiness remains, one that nothing can ever truly fill. And the one question left unanswered: what makes someone so consumed by anger that they cross the line and become a killer? Thanks for watching, everyone. Your support means a lot to me, and you can help my channel grow by hitting that like button, dropping a comment, and sharing this video. Your engagement really makes a difference. See you soon.